right, is everyone seeing that?
Yeah, we
All right.
see it.
Yeah.
Yep. It's
Okay.
not in slideshow format.
Oh, it's not?
No, it's in the overall PowerPoint format.
Oh,
All right. Hello, everyone. We are beginning today's session. So, welcome everyone to this session today on community science examples from the USA and beyond. We do have some international perspectives and applications reflected here today that we want to acknowledge. My name is Tim Barzik. I'm a federal scientist. I work primarily on cumulative impacts and their effects on communities and the community scale. And the talks that you'll see today are primarily initiated from a special issue in the journal Environmental Justice titled Make It Matter, Action, Research, and Community Science to Change the Status Quo, that I was a guest editor on with Esther Min from the University of Washington. And so a lot of all the talks you'll see here today are papers that will be published in that special issue. And I invite everyone to check that out as the papers become available and the special issue comes together. As a little bit of housekeeping, we have 4 talks today. Each one will be 15 minutes long, and we will not take any questions directly after each talk. Instead, we will go through all 4 of the talks and then take questions at the end in the final 10 to 15 minutes for all the presentations. So if you are in the audience and you have a question, please make sure to record it in the chat or write it down so that you can ask it after all 4 talks have been presented. And with that, we will go ahead and begin with Kayla Weems. She will be presenting the Lemmings Dilemma, an examination of environmental justice, volunteerism, and the pursuit of empowerment in biodiversity organizations in Canada. Take it away, Kayla.
thank you for the introduction, Tim. Hi, everyone. So my name is Kayla Weems, and I'm a Master of Arts student at the Natural Resources and Environmental Studies program at the University of Northern British Columbia. As Tim stated, our discussion paper is called The Lemmings Dilemma, an examination of environmental justice, volunteerism, and the pursuit of empowerment in biodiversity conservation organizations in Canada, published by myself and Dr. Mark Grew, Dr. Annie Booth, and Dr. Chris J. Lemieux. And this research was supported by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, the University of Northern British Columbia, and Wilfrid Laurier University. And just to situate myself here today, so I'm calling from the traditional territory of the Lheidli here in Prince George, British Columbia, Canada. For those of you that may not know where that is, that's about midway up British Columbia. So just entering into the northern BC province. So for the outline for today's talk, so I'll start with the introduction, study background, followed by the literature review, the methods, results, key findings, and next steps. So I'd first like to identify the problem that we identified. So biodiversity in Canada is at risk, and thousands of species are in danger of disappearing. And combating the biodiversity crisis while addressing related challenges like climate change requires innovative solutions that effectively translate policy to protect species at risk on a provincial or federal scale. And a lack of information is not the major barrier to biodiversity conservation, although mechanisms to translate information into action are urgently needed. Moving on to the proposed solution. So collaboration between community science programs and provincial staff is one way to facilitate the flow of vital data to policymakers to improve conservation outcomes. And community science is defined as a scientific research and monitoring based on scientific modes of inquiry, which are firstly community-driven and community-controlled, and secondly characterized by place-based knowledge and social learning, collective action, and empowerment. And for the purpose of the paper and this presentation, we'll be using the term community science as is more inclusive. So the research questions that we seek to answer is firstly, how do community science programs in Canada navigate challenges through program design? And secondly, what are the leading challenges that community science program staff face that threaten the success and longevity of their programs? So moving on to the literature review. So to support the transformative change needed to conserve biodiversity across Canada, policy and management responses must engage multiple ways of knowing. So community science is effective in addressing both social and technical aspects of problems. And by engaging many volunteers, community science projects offer a unique way to efficiently gather spatial and temporal data over large areas. And moving beyond the data, community science projects can also build capacity by encouraging deeper interest among the public in participating in other conservation actions. So an example project of a community science project is the Christmas bird count that started in 1901, and it is North America's longest running citizen science project. And people in more than 2,000 locations throughout the Western Hemisphere participate in this Christmas bird count each year. So the information collected by thousands of volunteer participants forms one of the largest sets of wildlife survey data. And the results are used by conservation biologists, environmental planners, and naturalists to assess the population trends and distribution of birds. And then volunteers get together on a set date to go out and count and record birds within their area. And then this data is translated into action by informing species at risk policy. So to set the stage of what volunteerism looks like in Canada, so in Canada, data suggests a clear link between age and volunteering. So for example, in 2013, Statistics Canada found that the highest rate of volunteering was amongst youth aged 15 to 19, although data showed that volunteers aged 65 to 74 provided the most volunteer hours. And common volunteer motivations include opportunities to develop knowledge specific to an environmental domain, and the ability to convene with and connect to place, and the opportunity to contribute one's effort to a broader collective goal. And moving on to post-secondary partnerships. So community science has become a platform for biodiversity partnerships to take place. So universities, governments, and a wide range of other third parties have become progressively more interested and committed to knowledge mobilization. And there is a need for sound community engagement to produce a collective vision and a commitment to sharing power so that benefits accrue across all partners. So for our study, we used case study, and we utilized community science as a distinct case to learn about community engagement in the field of biodiversity conservation. And case study with a methodology provides a beneficial research approach when understanding a phenomenon of interest that requires an exploration of how that phenomenon is situated within and shaped by its surrounding context. And case study is also flexible in that it can accommodate a range of data collection methods, which is often required when examining dynamic multi-scale policy problems. Moving on to our sampling for the study. So as hubs of community science programs and knowledge, the digital repository of CitSci and SciStarter were a starting point for identifying relevant programs. These are essentially website databases that hold relevant community science programs near you based on location. And to be eligible for recruitment, a community science program had to firstly have a focus on biodiversity conservation, secondly, have a stated research and or learning objective indicating an intended biodiversity conservation science and policy link, and lastly, be based in Canada or have a project scope that includes data collected in Canada. And community science program staff and coordinators were an appropriate and under-examined unit of analysis for addressing our objective. So as professionals involved in the design and delivery of conservation programming, program staff and coordinators have intimate experience with knowledge co-production and a community science context. So for the data collection, involves semi-structured interviews with community science staff and coordinators. So this included 16 individuals working as part of 11 distinct programs or projects across Canada. And participants all worked in the capacity of designing different program functions, managing project logistics, and or coordinating volunteers. And while roles varied, all participants were involved directly in work that attuned them to the experience of participants within the program or project, and often strategic decision-making about the type of experience that was desired. And as potential participants in the study were drawn from across Canada, 45 to 60-minute interviews were conducted virtually using the Zoom platform or by phone where preferred by the participant. And for the data analysis, so all transcripts were checked against the audio recording for accuracy and used in a conventional bottom-up thematic analysis. And we used the thematic analysis, followed the techniques and stages described by Sharma's 2014 in Constructing Grounded Theory. So moving on to the results section. So in the results, we identified two major themes that emerge. The first theme, relationships and program design, and the second theme, new pathways for partnerships. And the following results section also uses pseudonyms for individuals and programs to protect anonymity. So moving on to the first theme, relationships and program design. So we were interested in learning from program coordinators, not just about participant motivations, but whether and how such motivations were reflected in engagement design. In many cases, coordinators and staff were all well aware of the growing critique of traditional citizen science and sought to operate differently by using participant motivations as a design parameter to create meaningful experiences. And to advance biodiversity conservation, coordinators recognize that the design of community science programs must find ways to center and more deeply value people. In one example, the Lake Health Monitoring Program used a design where objectives are set by local participants with staff engaged on an as-needed basis. And coordinators enable this model using built-in feedback loops to monitor program function, particularly whether and how the project is meeting community needs. And comments from Fatima, a coordinator with the Lake Health Monitoring Program, indicate that when this level of relational accountability is present, other difficult to mobilize goals like translating knowledge into political action can evolve naturally. And for our second theme, new pathways for partnership. So to combat the commonly experienced challenge of volunteer recruitment, retention, and funding, community science program staff contemplate post-secondary partnerships as one way to alleviate these challenges. Majority of coordinators acknowledge the retention and recruitment of volunteers as an ongoing and in some cases a growing challenge. Due to the aging of current volunteer cohorts, coordinators expressed a need to think about and promote a pivot towards specific modes of youth recruitment. In some cases, this was recognized as a general challenge, and in others, it was highlighted as a genuine threat to program longevity, but in most, it was highlighted as a key priority. And the aging of volunteers was not just a concern from the perspective of the person in power provided to a project. Coordinators also recognize that volunteers are critical links within the knowledge network that sustains their program, and the aging out represented the loss of decades worth of knowledge that is held by long-term volunteers, particularly knowledge of how to work effectively within a local context. And this competency will be lost if they are unable to transfer lessons to new long-term recruits. Coordinators are increasingly called upon to be creative and flexible in the design of programs that create meaningful experiences for volunteers. They are also asked to attract new participation while simultaneously facing a funding landscape that provides less and less flexibility to adjust to the market they are designing for. And acquiring funding for research is challenging for all, but for community science programs, rigid funding models become unattainable when the very nature of the type of co-creation that is needed to sustain success does not fit within the bounds of funding frameworks. So being faced with rigid funding models and the demand to generate new recruitment pathways, one adaptive strategy coordinators identified is the pursuit of post-secondary partnerships. Partnering with post-secondary institutions was viewed as a requirement and necessity to gain access to broader funding opportunities. This closely reflects findings from scholarship on university community partnerships, which has shown that community partners can benefit from several critical resources held by post-secondary institutions. This includes fundings from grants, skilled and knowledgeable staff accessed through students and faculty, and time. And as community science programs contemplate post-secondary partnerships, we highlight the importance of the need for social accountability. In this context, describes social accountability as the idea that universities have a moral and civic duty to respond to the needs of communities that surround the academy when designing and teaching curriculum and conducting research. So the key takeaways from this paper and presentation is firstly, that interviews with program coordinators revealed that partnerships with post-secondary institutions form one strategy for adapting to an increasingly difficult biodiversity conservation landscape in Canada. Leveraging the strengths of the social and economic benefits of partnerships between post-secondary institutions and community science programs does require caution. And lastly, University community partnerships can be reciprocal relationships depending on how challenges are addressed and whether the value of community science programs is accredited. So as I previously mentioned, I am in my second year of my Master of Arts degree in the Natural Resources and Environmental Studies program at UNBC. So I will be developing 2 manuscripts for my thesis, looking into research into how knowledge developed in community science programs is utilized in Canada's biodiversity policy arena, and a second manuscript looking into research into community science staff experiences to try to describe roles and motivations to improve staff retention and program longevity. And lastly, I would like to thank you all for attending this session, and I look forward to answering any questions at the end. I'd also like to again thank our sponsors and funders, the University of Northern British Columbia, Wilfrid Laurier University, and the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. And as a final last note, I would like to encourage all of you to research and look up a community science program located near you and try to get involved. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kayla. That was really interesting. A lot of important points there about retention and engaging people and longevity concerns and some approaches to potentially alleviate those issues. So next we'll move on to Jessica Leclerc. She will be presenting on public health nurse partnerships to advance environmental justice and heart health in the Black community. Over to you, Jessica.
Great. Can you see my slides in presenter view? Just want to make sure.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thanks for that really interesting presentation, Kayla, and thanks for the introduction, Tim. As you shared, my name is Jessica Leclerc. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a postdoctoral trainee with the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Nursing, which is located on the ancestral lands of the Ho-Chunk Nation. And I am really excited to present our paper on public health nurse partnerships to advance environmental justice and heart health in a Black community. You see here our extensive list of co-authors. I just want to give a quick shout out to our partners with the community-based public health nursing team, Rose Fredrickson, Sarah Hughes, who's the program manager for the team, Katie Peterson and Polly Yang, and then Dr. Linda Oakley is the PI for the study. Just a minute while I try to advance my slides here. There we go. Okay. So I just want to begin with a few definitions of terms that I'm using in this presentation. I know that many of you are very familiar with these, but I just want to cover the basics here. So multiple studies have found very strong correlations between environmental exposures and inequalities in heart health among Black populations. Environmental health is defined as the freedom from illness or injury related to toxic agents or other environmental conditions that are potentially detrimental to human health. And Robert Bullard, who's widely considered the initiator of our contemporary environmental justice movement, noted that all people and communities are entitled to equal protection of environmental and public health laws and regulations. And Black communities are being overexposed to racialized disparate conditions, also known as environmental injustices, that are leading to a higher incidence of cardiovascular disorders, which is emphasizing this really urgent requirement for public health interventions. Whoops. So again, I want to highlight the community-based public health nurses here before I get into exactly what that means and what they do. In the picture on the left, you see Rose Fredrickson in the middle, and then Polly Yang is just to the right of them. And again, they are two of our co-authors on this paper. So public health nursing is defined as the practice of promoting and protecting the health of populations. And community-based public health nurses practice in neighborhoods that are experiencing unjust health outcomes and could therefore be very effective facilitators of environmental justice interventions that are promoting heart health and promote other aspects of health promotion and disease prevention. So the community-based public health nurses are addressing unjust population health outcomes and the social determinants of health by organizing to develop and implement public health interventions in partnerships with communities. So they've earned trust and built relationships over time with the communities they serve, which are predominantly Black, Latine, and Hmong. They form authentic partnerships with community members using data and lived experiences to identify and elevate community health needs, connect individuals with resources and services. And overall, the community-based public health nurses take the strengths-based collaborative approach to health promotion and disease prevention and support the needs and the priorities that are identified by community members. So understanding Black residents' perspectives on how environmental injustices are affecting their health is a first step towards informing any public health nursing actions to advance environmental justice. So our study included two aims here. The first one was understanding the relationship between perceived environmental injustice, stress, and health among Black adults. And then two, understanding the environmental injustice concerns of Black adults. So we developed a mixed method study to explore whether our partnership could support the community-based public health nurse community organizing with the Black residents by engaging them in determining environmental justice and heart health priorities. And so for the sake of time, I will focus on the qualitative results from our second study aim in this presentation. So using a community-based participatory action approach, again, we utilized a mixed method survey to explore the relationship between perceived environmental injustice, stress, and health among Black adults, and to understand their concerns about environmental injustices. The community-based public health nurses use their existing networks to assist with participant recruitment from community-based organizations, including community health worker organizations, grassroots community-based organizations led by the Black community, neighborhood associations, community-based programs with our county human services departments, city programs addressing racial equity, and in their one-on-one interactions with community members at events or just during their other work in the community. So people were eligible to participate in our study if they were 18 years or older, English speaking, and if they racially identified as Black or African American. We had 203 participants from our local Black community with a mean age of 46.7, and over 69% were women. 137 participants, so 68% of our sample, responded to a question on our survey that asked them to name the environmental health hazard in your neighborhood that worries you the most. So we then organized the participant responses into three categories: racialization and inequality, overexposures, and unequal access to resources. So we'll go through each one of those now. So some participants explicitly named racism as the environmental health hazard that worried them the most. For example, one participant wrote, and I'll read the quotes here, political environments, racism, judicial racism, political racism against Black persons altogether, the US quote unquote justice system, the court systems, and institutional racism are constantly ongoing and stressful towards Black people. People said they wanted to experience less racism, discrimination, micromanagement, and microaggressions. They described economic inequality as a structural injustice created by state violence and capitalism. For example, another quote here, a participant wrote, and again, these are all people writing into the survey, "The environmental health hazard that worries me the most is economic inequality between African Americans and white/other races in this country. We African Americans want spacious land, beautiful homes, ample amenities, freedom from poverty, and less racist towards us attitudes. These items should be in repayment for hundreds of years of unpaid, non-compensated labor, blood and life given to raise this country to its present stature." People describe their experiences of overexposure to multiple environmental hazards. And here are just some examples of their concerns about overexposure to hazards related to land, air, water, and climate change and environmental racism. Many people listed garbage hazards like the smell and pollution, industrial pollution affecting air, PFAS and other environmental injustices that impact BIPOC communities in regards to drinking water, fishing, and recreational opportunities. Climate change, it's getting hotter all the time. The piping and water system in the housing, water filtration systems in buildings, the water is contaminated. Better management on the properties where they place minorities would help the health hazard. I've noticed a big difference between the neighborhoods. There are noticeable differences between property management and water filtration systems mainly, amongst other things. People described how unequal access to resources negatively affected them. So these systems included less access to healthy and affordable food, dignified housing, quality healthcare, safe schools, and green spaces. One participant explained how these experiences become cumulative. They said jobs, people have a hard time getting a job, school short staffing, hard time getting a home and acquiring food, and all of these affect health. Another said, a lot of families are caught in this ugly web. The prevalence of mental health issues and lack of accessible mental health providers was also noted. However, the health and the well-being of young Black children was most commonly stated as a priority concern. So some limitations, the study may not be able to represent the viewpoints and experiences of members of the Black community who are not involved with the community-based organizations that we partnered with to recruit participants. So again, people not participating in community-based organizations might have different health practices and beliefs and socioeconomic situations than those that are involved with community organizations. And then finally, while the literature did inform our survey development, further validity and reliability testing is required. So the findings from the study really should be interpreted as early findings, with future research requiring surveys that have been tested for reliability and validity. So what does this all mean and what are some next steps? Well, our exploratory analyses clearly show the articulated concerns around environmental health and the priorities in a marginalized Black community that are emphasizing this pressing need for community-based public health nurses to prioritize environmental injustice as a necessary step in advancing health equity. So we did share these early findings and discussed with community members, community-based public health nurses, and the community-based organizations at a community meeting just last year. And the community-based public health nurses are fully integrated into the communities they serve, both geographically and relationally. So therefore, their follow-up with the community regarding these early study results is ongoing with all of the previously mentioned organizations that I shared earlier, and with the individuals who assisted with participant recruitment. The nurses convene and collaborate with community members, private and public sector agencies, and across systems to elevate these concerns and priorities. And our study findings can also help guide very meaningful conversations about improving air and water quality, increasing climate change resilience, access to resources, and decreasing environmental health hazards to improve heart health. So just some examples, the public health nurses can share the study results related to racialization and inequality with our city's Racial Equity and Social Justice Initiative, which focuses on promoting racial equity within all of our city operations, our policies, and our budgets. Our city has also embarked on an air quality monitoring program. So again, using our study results related to overexposures, the public health nurses can advocate for air quality monitoring within their respective geographic areas that they're working. We also have public health staff that are involved in PFAS education in communities most impacted by the contaminants in water. So the public health nurses can now utilize these study results to bolster those existing efforts. And they can also use our study findings to educate our local leaders, leveraging other public health resources such as our environmental health staff and policy analysts to advocate for changes in indoor air and water quality regulations. And then finally, to address participants' experiences with unequal access to resources, the public health nurses are engaging with neighborhood resource teams around the city, which were created by the city to coordinate, to develop, and to improve city services to neighborhoods in collaboration with residents and other partners. And then lastly, as public health employees, the role of the community-based public health nurse is to partner with community residents in implementing these long-standing public health programs and resources to advance health equity by eliminating these structural and social systems that are overexposing Black communities to these unjust environmental health hazards. Here are my references, and thanks so much for your attention. I just want to highlight some people that you could follow up with if you're interested in learning more. Dr. Sarah Hughes, again, as I mentioned earlier, is the program manager for the community-based public health nursing team. If you want to find out more about that, she would love to have questions directed her way. And then Dr. Linda Oakley, again, is the PI for the study, which was a larger study, and I'm just presenting one small piece of it. So again, thanks so much for listening.
Thank you, Jessica. Yeah, a lot of important considerations there in terms of like environmental sources produce many impacts other than pollution, right? So even if they're expressing concerns about sort of pollution related issues, there are many things related to these environmental sources and broader categories of sources overall, like employment and economic opportunity, that also affect people's health, and how important it is to have a long-standing member like these public health nurses in there who can even not only address their particular issues directly related to public health, but also act as a convener, right? To bring these issues to the correct audience, if you will, in terms of like helping to impact those other things that people are concerned about. So thank you very much for that talk. Next, we have Hani Jafari, and she will be speaking on Can Spaces Be Oppressive? The Role of Urban Design in Fostering a Sense of Justice. Hania, we see your screen. It's in the sort of general PowerPoint mode. I don't know if that can go into slideshow. If not, you're welcome to just present it like this. Perfect. Thank you. Awesome. Take it away, Hania.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Barzik. Hello, everyone, colleagues and friends. Thanks for joining this valuable symposium. It's my honor to be here today, and thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak today. The title of my presentation is Can Spaces Be Oppressive? The Role of Urban Design in Fostering Sense of Justice. So I will examine the relationship between feeling of oppression in urban environment and our mental health, and suggest ways to restore our mental health in these spaces. Thirdly, I wanted to introduce myself. Just if I could. Shortly, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Hani Jafari Khaledi, PhD candidate in architecture at Iran University of Science and Technology, and my research focus is on the negative impacts of our environment on our perception, our mental health, and explore the ways to restore our mental health. This research is part of my doctoral research, which done with supervision of Dr. Khaksan, Dr. Faizi, and with consultation from Dr. Gharabaglu. Now let's start. First, I want you to imagine a polluted, noisy, crowded streetscape. The honking of cars, the noise of crowd, the towering gray buildings surrounded you. How do you feel here? Perhaps tired, anxious, or even suffocated. In fact, the feel of overwhelm and confinement in these kind of spaces is what we call perceived oppressiveness. Now we can go to Hudson Square streetscape in New York, or even just imagine a peaceful streetscape with abundance of greenery, high proportion of sky, and low-rise building. In this environment, we feel calm, sense of calm, and freedom of action. In fact, the feeling of pressure and confinement in crowded streetscapes is perceived oppressiveness, and these terms means we feel our environment is oppressing us and limit our freedom of action, even this oppression is not real. So what's the problem? Stress is one of the major challenges in 21st century urban environment, such as landscape, urbanscape, and other spaces. They characterize, influence our stress level. On the other hand, the perception of oppression has negatively impact on our health, our mental health. Therefore, it's necessary to assess various aspects of this kind of perception to minimize this negative impact. Therefore, as an aim, our research wanted to identify factors which influence this kind of perception. Therefore, we conducted a systematic review and using PRISMA framework to select and analyze the related article for reaching to a reliable conclusion. Our literature review, we can delve a bit deeper into the concept of perceived oppressiveness. As previously mentioned, it terms means to heighten sense of psychological pressure experienced in urban escapes or even urban environment, particularly in dense one. This sensation can range from mild negatively to more severe emotions such as fear, stress, and even claustrophobia and feeling of being suffocated. Previous researchers explored this feeling in relationship with tall buildings. However, this perception can arise from a variety of factors and doesn't necessarily require the presence of high-rise structures. Such perception can disrupt positive and effective mental process like cognitive restoration, which are focused in this study and in this article. I told you about cognitive restoration. In mental restoration, we have two primary theories. First, ART, attentional restoration theory by Kaplan, and second one is a stress recovery theory, SRT, by Ulrich. Both of them emphasize on the role of nature in restoring mental fatigue. But there is a problem here that I will tell you. But before that, I put this table here, and as you can see, this systematic review. Through this systematic review, we identified which aspect of our environment can influence which aspects of our health, our mental health, and cognitive science. For detailed information, I recommend referring to our research, our article in Journal of Environmental Justice. But here now I wanted just to emphasize that our environment positively and negatively can affect different aspects of our health. About theories, restoration theories, I said is one problem here. The problem, where does the problem lie? The issue arises from the decreased share of natural landscape in cities through the urbanization and population growth. On the other hand, because of our lifestyle, our modern lifestyle, people can't go out of the city to being with nature. Therefore, it's necessary and essential to assess different dimensions of our environment for finding new alternatives for nature and for restore the to restore our mental health. As a result, we identified the factors which influence our perceived oppression, which can cause stress and claustrophobia for people in three main categories, including environmental factors, human-environment interaction, and human factors. As you can see, each of them has their own categories and subcategories. I'd like to emphasize that for a detailed understanding, please refer to our article in Environmental Justice Journal to better understanding of the impact of these components. But just as a case study, I think it's a good time for examine some few examples from different parts of the US to better understanding the impact of these components. Let's start with Back Bay, Boston. Back Bay in Boston, when you imagine walking through this streetscape, you likely don't feel a high level of psychological stress. The streets, open spaces, diverse viewpoint, abundance of greenery, high proportion of sky, and historical context collectively contribute to reduce this kind of perception for users. Second one, we can say about Greenwich Village, which offer a relative peaceful atmosphere despite challenges like visual pollution, as you can see, and tall building densities, but the high proportion of sky and diverse viewpoint, which happen because of open spaces, can collectively reduce the perception of oppression for users. But what about the street in Chicago? Here we feel a bit like environment is putting pressure on us. It feels like built environment have a large share and humans have a smaller one. This happens due to various reasons, including the presence of numerous buildings which limiting our view. Let's take Wall Street as our next example. Is this a streetscape where you would want to stay and spend time, or you would prefer it just to a street to pass through? I think you would probably feel suffocation, anxious, and excessive psychological pressure from environment. But what factor contribute to this? In fact, the disproportion between the tall of the building and the wide of the street, the lack of landscape elements such as green and blue spaces, and in fact, limit 3D dimensional perspective create an experience of perceived oppressiveness in this urban escape. As a conclusion, to alleviate the negative psychological impact of our urban environment, such as feeling claustrophobia, stress, and perceived oppressiveness, we can implement several strategies. These include improving landscape design, reducing environmental pollutions, increase access to green and blue spaces, green and blue areas, developing pocket parks in citizens areas where people live, and maximize sky visibility. By adopting this approach, we can transform our cities to more healthier places for life. But there are some of our findings for a practical solution and recommendation for future research. Please refer to our article in Journal of Environmental Justice. Finally, I want to say thanks for your attention. Thanks for joining us today, and I hope you find this presentation informative. please feel free to reach out if you have any question. You can contact me via my email. And thanks a lot to Dr. Barzik for his advices during our process of our article submission. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. And yeah, that was a really interesting presentation. I really liked how, it focused on, especially the paper. And I encourage folks to look at it as well, because it really looks at many different aspects of urban design. Conventionally, we talk a lot about green space, but this really went into the view of the sky and the blue area people see, the design of the buildings themselves. And I really like how it tied into the theory of attention recovery and the stress recovery theory. And it was really just a very elegant method of looking at urban design in kind of a new way, in a more nuanced way as well. So I thought it was really interesting. I'll also mention I did my graduate work on urban microclimates. And looking at the effect of buildings and building materials on surface temperatures especially. So I have to say it struck a particular chord with me as well. So thank you for that talk and for joining us today. Our next talk will be from Rory O'Rourke and Jamie Donatuto. The title of their talk is "You Say Natural Resources, We Say Part of Our Community Health, Using Indigenous Health Indicators to Evaluate Coast Salish Priorities when the environment is polluted." All right, over to you, Rory and Jamie.
Great, thanks, Tim. Great, thanks, Tim. Everybody see my PowerPoint presenter mode? Okay, looking good. All right, thank you. All right, thank you. So my name is Rory O'Rourke. At the time that this work was conducted, I worked at 20 miles northwest of Seattle. And now I am a toxicologist and tribal science council rep for EPA Region 10, which is the states of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and 271 tribal nations.
Rory, we lost your presentation though.
Okay, yes, there's something weird that happened when the IT popped up on my screen. I had like a weird connection thing, so I'm not sure what happened there, but apologies.
Yeah, no problem.
Of course, all the IT glitches happen just as you're about to present. And now I'd like to go and introduce my co-presenter, co-author, and longtime friend and colleague and mentor, Jamie Donna. Jamie.
Thanks, Rory. Hello, everyone. My name is Jamie Donatuto. I'm the Community Environmental Health Analyst for the Swinomish Indian Tribal Community, where I have had the honor to work for the last 25 years. And so we're speaking to you from the homelands of the Coast Salish peoples, both Rory and I, which is Western, present-day Washington State. We do have other co-authors who worked with us on this particular project. Just to name them briefly, Larry Dunn from Lower Elwha, Denise Taylor and Allison O'Sullivan from Suquamish, and several other Indigenous elders and experts who have always helped us along the way. I just want to say briefly that the work that we're going to be presenting today is not our own knowledge. Everything that we learn from our elders. And so we stand on the shoulders of our elders and steward this knowledge in the best way that we can. That said, can you go to the next slide, Rory? We want to dedicate this work today to Wanasea Swinomish Elder Larry Campbell, who walked on in February 2023. The Indigenous health indicators were the inspiration of Larry, and I had the honor of working with him for more than 20 years. So we thank him for his good work and his teachings, and we hope to be able to honor all that he shared with us. So what are the Indigenous health indicators? What you see here on the screen are 6 non-physical indicators of health that are specific to the Swinomish tribe. So you'll see on the bottom it says Swinomish example. What we found was many years ago, many people talked about health in the biophysical realm, in the physiological realm, and on the individual level, but there was no way to really express or to evaluate health on realms that many Indigenous peoples consider health to be, which is familial community scales and the connections between people more than humans, the environment, in the mental, the social, the emotional, as well as the physical. And so Larry and I worked with Swinomish to develop these 6 indicators of health. You'll see the Lushootseed, seed, which is the Swinomish language on top, followed by the words that we use when we're talking to folks outside of the community, and then words that were used within the many interviews that we had within Swinomish, over 100, to develop these indicators themselves. But the work that we're actually going to share today is that Larry and I realized that these were specific only to Swinomish. And so even though Swinomish has many Coast Salish relatives, each individual community is unique and they have their own worldviews. And so from that regard, these may not be reflective of other neighboring Swinomish or Coast Salish communities. And so we reached out to Rory and to other tribes to test how we could develop indicators that would reflect more broadly Coast Salish priorities of health.
Thanks, Jamie. Some of the benefits of using the Indigenous health indicators are that they combine qualitative and quantitative elements to determine community health values and status, as Jamie mentioned. And that allows for bridging the gap a little bit between, the Western science world and Indigenous knowledges, where the Indigenous knowledges, a lot of the knowledge is shared through more of a storytelling method. And so some of the qualitative collection allows for a little bit more of being able to collect that nuance and being able to understand that with the results and the actual quantitative data. It also allows the community to interpret their own results instead of an outside researcher that may be coming in with their own bias, or they just are not familiar with the cultures and the traditions of the community. And so having the workshop the way it was, that the community was able to provide input on their own results, and is intended to complement and supplement a human health risk assessment and not replace it. We are aware that they measure really 2 different things. A human health risk assessment is more looking at a expected physiological impact from a chemical, where this is more the social impact of a particular event, whether the Indigenous health indicators have been used for both pollution events, which were examined in this paper, and also for climate change and oil spill risk scenarios, which will be discussed later. And it includes methods for replicability. They're providing data for decision making for a variety of either tribal, state, or federal governments.
So a little bit more about how they were developed. So what you're seeing here are images that are important to many Coast Salish communities. We have the canoe journey. So you see the image of the canoe in the upper left-hand corner. The canoe journey is a once-a-year celebration of individual communities visiting each other and celebrating their culture, their ways of life, and knowing that waterways were the original highways of the area. You also see 2 pictures that involve shellfish. Coast Salish communities are coastline communities. For example, Swinomish is a low-lying reservation that's 90% surrounded by water, and shellfish are a cultural keystone species. So along with salmon, crab, deer, elk, shellfish are part of the cosmology. They represent an important aspect of life that is more than just a subsistence food source. We wanted to be able to demonstrate if these particular resources are contaminated, how does that impact more than just individual physiological health? How does that impact families and communities? How does that impact connections, intergenerational knowledge transfer, sovereignty and self-determination, cultural practices, all of these different aspects that are parts of health for different communities.
Thanks, Jamie. And so as part of this collaboration for this project, Jamie had reached out to other Coast Salish tribes and staff at Coast Salish tribes to be able to understand if we could develop a regional set of indicators. And they weren't guaranteed, because even geographically close communities can differ in their knowledge, language, and values, as Jamie mentioned. And we can go into that more in our next slide, where we show the map about that. We also, when Jamie came to us at Port Gamble Slalom Tribe, we had Jamie had the indicators developed at Swinomish. However, we also had to tailor them, though, for indicators that would work at Port Gamble Slalom Tribe. So I worked with the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer at the time and other staff such as shellfish biologists, cultural resource managers, and we worked to adapt the indicators and add context and modify the words for recognition and recognizability within Port Gamble Slalom Tribe. We also went through the institutional review board approval, which Jamie will go into a little bit later. We set up an intertribal agreement as well for funds to allow for the honorarium and other costs associated with the workshop. And then we also went out and invited participants from the community to be able to participate in the workshops. These typically were knowledge holders of natural resource information within the community and folks that are typically very involved with community events. For example, like this clam bake here that's shown in the photo, which is pretty common in a lot of funerals, weddings, and other important life events. This is just an overview of the Coast Salish tribes and First Nations that were involved with evaluating the Indigenous health indicators. The Coast Salish are composed of individual tribes and First Nations that subsist and practice ceremonies with fish, shellfish, and plants from the Salish Sea. And the Salish Sea is the more inclusive name for what we now recognize as the common ecosystem for Puget Sound, Strait of Georgia, and Strait of Juan de Fuca, and also recognizes the Indigenous people that live there across this, what is now an international border. And we start off with, in this paper, we look at the results and at the workshops that were conducted at Port Gamble Slalom Tribe, Suquamish Tribe, Stillaguamish Tribe, and Lower Elwha Column Tribe that you are in the center of the map. And Jamie is representing Swinomish Tribe, and those results are referenced in our paper, but described in more detail in another paper. Also the same for Squaxin Island and Sabletooth First Nation, which is up near Vancouver, British Columbia, and Canada. And here are the timeline of the workshops across the four tribes. So we had the initial workshop that was done in Swinomish that was described in the other paper, and that was done in 2012, and we used that to help as our model for how to run the workshops going forward. And so we started out with Lower Elwha Column Tribe in September 2012. Jamie and Larry Campbell went to each of the workshops to be able to ensure that the methodologies were consistent and also in line with the purpose of the project. And also, as part of the recruiting participants, each tribe recruited either typically tribal leadership or someone who was revered as a natural resource knowledge holder in the community to help facilitate the workshop. And so we worked with those in each community to be able to help host and facilitate the workshop. The next one was at Port Gamble Slalom Tribe, which is what I was involved with organizing as well. Suquamish Tribe was hosted in March 2013, and Stillaguamish Tribe was hosted in November 2013. And so the results of all these workshops are included in the paper. And the benefit of this paper is that also we were able to look a little bit more, have a broader view with these four tribes at looking at that data at once. Did Jamie drop off? Or like, it looks like, well, this part that Jamie was going to cover is the institutional review board. And so as part of our work with the Indigenous Review Board, we went to the Portland Area Indian Health Services and went to their institutional review board, all of the staff surveys, they have a application, all the different elements of the project were evaluated for conformance and making sure that they followed the ethics with working with Indigenous communities in the Pacific Northwest in their coverage area. And Jamie, if she's able to join us again, can maybe speak more fully to that when she can join back on. So the research objectives for the workshops were to establish that they reflect each community's meanings and priorities, assess whether the indicators resonated with the participants for hypothetical pollution scenarios, and we evaluated the efficacy of them with the participants and the tribal leadership. And Jamie, it looks like you rejoined us just as you dropped off for the Indigenous Institutional Review Board. So would you like to cover it more fully than I could?
Sure, I'll just give a brief overview. So most of us are familiar with institutional review boards. They are required by Belmont protocols, but institutional review boards are often very Western, and they're thinking about protecting individuals instead of entire communities or groups. And so many Indigenous communities have realized these shortcomings and have decided that they want to have control over their own data. And so there are Indigenous review boards. They come in many shapes and styles. We have two that we use at Swinomish. One is run through the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board. It's one of the 12 IHS centers across the country. We also use the Northwest Indian College, which is an Indigenous college located in the Pacific Northwest, and they also have an institutional review board. These reviews are done in a very different way. They think about the culture, they think about protections on community scales. So there's many other aspects here. The timelines are also different. The entire process is different. I just want to say this now, that if you ever work with Indigenous communities, please first ask how they would like their reviews done. Some are simply with elders groups. Some use their own individual institutional review boards. Some use Indigenous institutional review boards at Indigenous colleges. There are many options, but please know that just what you see in academic institutions is not the only way.
Great, Jamie. Thanks. Glad you were able to join back on for that part. So the next part that we wanted to cover too was about the indicators themselves and the attributes. So we have the example here of how the Indigenous health indicators were shared with workshop participants. And we added context for each community by adding photos that were associated with the community, in particular community events, as you can see here, or places where the tribe harvests routinely, or photos from various ceremonies to help add context. We also modified the words a little bit to make them more in context with the words that the community uses to share their own knowledge and more accurately depict various concepts that were familiar with the community. Here's an example here of where we went through with the community members whether the indicators represented the communities, and then the weighting and ranking were used to evaluate the indicators. And so, Jamie, I didn't know if you wanted to go a little bit more detail about that.
Sure. Do you want to do that in the next slide?
Yes.
So the way that the indicators are ranked, clearly this is not something that you could simply place a number to, nor would we ever ask folks to determine which ones are more important in a particular context. So the way that we start is saying that they are all important, whatever the Indigenous community health indicators are that are developed by that community, they're all equally important. But knowing that all communities are limited in both time and resources, and also whatever the context is, please help us determine which ones you want the community government to focus on first. And so that's really the way that we describe it. So for instance, Rory talked about the oil spill as a hypothetical scenario. So first we developed the indicators specifically with the communities, and then we ran through them with hypothetical scenarios. So saying that hypothetically there's an oil spill on a Port Gambles Column beach that is going to affect this particular beach, it's going to close it, people will no longer be able to get there. Which of the indicators would you like us to focus on first? And then ranking them using constructed scales. So constructed scales are basically proxy scales. You can think about them like the Dow Jones, like the APGAR scale. These are all constructed scales. You can use narrative-based scales like very good to very bad. You can use color-based scales. There's all different ways to do it. And then what you can do is when people use those scales, you can then convert them to numbers to do the analyses. So for instance, if we say very good to very bad on a 4-point scale, then you'd have 1, 2, 3, and 4 to be able to do the analysis in.
Great, thank you, Jamie. And we got some positive and negative feedback after we did the workshops regarding the Indigenous health indicators. We did receive a lot of support from tribal leadership. They proposed it for various different reasons to address community concerns, for example, allocating harvest resources and staff resources, program priorities, and maybe even incorporating into environmental remediation and restoration. However, we also acknowledge we got some negative feedback too, and we're also open for room for improvement. For example, one of the elders questioned whether the community was represented and did we understand the questions. And some of the workshop participants, they commented that they had difficulty evaluating because of the unclear definitions, the need to incorporate better upland knowledge, and they needed more questions about traditional plants.
So we'll finish up our presentation with just talking about what's next. I just wanted to let you know how we operationalize the Indigenous health indicators and to give you an example from the Swinomish community. So when we used our Indigenous health indicators to assess storm surge, sea level rise, and ocean acidification within the Swinomish community, as I mentioned, low-lying island community. And what we found, which kind of surprised us, was that intergenerational knowledge transfer, what us nerds call it, or education in the teachings, which is what the tribe calls it, was ranked first above everything else that they wanted us to focus on. And from that, we developed a clam garden, which is what is here in this picture. It's an ancient indigenous technology. It creates low-lying rock walls below mean low tide, so it's not hard wall armoring. It's a community event. All ages are out there. They build the wall, they maintain the wall. We have community events multiple times a year. And it slows storm surge. The shell hash from the clams that build up behind it really help with ocean acidification, is the theory. It also helps with sea level rise. Indigenous peoples have been moving these walls since time immemorial, and there's carbon dating to determine that in other aspects of the Coast Salish. If you'd like to learn more about the Indigenous health indicators, we have a free online learning module. The link is there in the slide. I would like to say that we've worked with communities all over North America, using these to develop health programs for tribes, thinking about impacts from development for First Nations, climate change, all kinds of things. So they can really be adapted in that way. So thank you for your attention, and we really appreciate the time to be able to present this data. We're certainly going to be continuing to move forward in the work, and I just really appreciate everyone's interest.
We appreciate the invitation to present today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie and Rory. I get to pick people's brains for the last 8 minutes, so I'm going to ask you guys a question first, or sort of get your feedback on this. As you mentioned, each community is unique, and yet they share a lot of common concerns in many ways as well. So, like Jamie, you mentioned, for example, one thing to really ask all of them: how would you like your review to be done? So that could be sort of a standard question for all the different tribes, right? Or as you mentioned, one of the common concerns of theirs was the intergenerational knowledge transfer. So I was kind of wondering, what would be sort of a common denominator going into a situation like that, where you do have, many unique communities, and you want to sort of still, as the sort of researcher, go in there with sort of a common thread or a common approach that you can then tailor to each unique situation. Do you have any sort of final take-home messages on, the most efficient or best ways of doing that, in terms of keeping that open mind, but also having a structure in the back of your mind of how you can do it?
Absolutely. Over the last 20 years of working with many Indigenous communities, clearly the first thing to do is to listen and to learn, and not to go in with preconceived notions. I have seen some similarities across many Indigenous worldviews, though, and so that's usually what we begin to develop from the ground up with each individual community. Like, some communities have 3 Indigenous health indicators, some have 7. They have very different terms, but usually they're all founded on sovereignty, which is never talked about in health assessments otherwise, but is so incredibly important to Indigenous communities, culture, and teachings. So not just the culture, not just the ability to be able to have access to land, to be able to practice those particular cultural practices, but the ability to transfer them to other generations. And I see those three across every single community I've ever worked with. All of the other indicators could be very different. Just a quick example, working in the Plains tribes, the medicine wheel, as most of us know what it looks like, it has 4 segments and a wheel. That is what they used for their indigenous health indicators. And so they can be interpreted in many different ways, but there are definitely lines that move through all of them.
Great, thank you. I'm going to go over to Kayla real quick in terms of, engagement, especially for younger participants. I couldn't help but see, as someone was taking a picture of a plant or a flower, I had memories of Pokemon Go running through my head. And I was wondering if there were ways, to like gamify or incentivize, engaging youth in terms of, they may not be as much of wanting to go out there and document nature. But has there been any thought in terms of like, how using, modern approaches could almost make it more incentivized for them to do something like that?
Yeah, so our study looked at more higher levels of involvement from volunteers in programs, but there's apps like iNaturalist and eBird are really popular, really common. So eBird, you can start your birding list when you go walking on a trail, and it is a little bit competitive, which is also really fun. You can kind of see who has the highest bird counts in your area, things like that. And iNaturalist is also really fun to use. You can report anything from plants to beetles to roadkill on the highways, things like that. So those applications have really skyrocketed, especially since COVID, actually, getting people outside more and especially youth. Kind of making a little bit of a game of it, but it's also exposing you to your backyard and other trails around your house and stuff like that. So it's definitely something that it's also not as time consuming as traditional volunteer roles, which I think is also really important to note, especially in the current world and things like that. Volunteering takes a lot of time, and it also, you don't get paid for it, right? So time is money a lot, and it's expensive to live everywhere. So looking more into that. But yeah, you're right. There are applications that do exist right now. It's just a means of trying to integrate those into more traditional volunteering platforms, kind of thing.
Great, thank you, Kayla. So Hania, a question for you. A lot of cities are already built, right? So in terms of implementing some, changes to green space or the view of the sky or noise pollution, who might be some of the most important people to engage with those? Who would be the most important decision makers? The urban planners, the Department of Transportation, and when might be some of the opportunities that would be most impactful, like when they are when they are building a new building or redesigning an area? What might be some opportunities to really engage with people to bring about some changes based on some of those indicators that you had mentioned?
Thanks a lot to your perfect question. I think the best way is urban designers and decision makers do something for our cities. We have some solution. Still, for example, we have so many leftover spaces in areas which citizens live. We can use them for making pocket parks, for we can way to use a material which are more familiar with memory of users, to be more friendly with users. I think we have just one way to regenerate our cities, which can happen by the help of urban designers and decision makers.
Excellent, thank you, Tanya. And Kayla had a question, but I'm going to ask Jessica a final question here. So we only have a few seconds left. I think that, again, as mentioned, this role of convener in the public nurse partnerships, I just wanted you to, if you can, because we only have a few seconds, but can you speak a little more on that? Because I think that role of convener and them learning and having those longstanding relationships and bringing them to other decision makers is really important. Can you just speak to that in any way you'd like for the last few seconds here?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And so again, I want to just highlight what the theme of what other people are saying is. The first role is a listener, and to listen and join other events that are run by community-based organizations and build those relationships and trust. So that then you can get to the point of wanting to ask questions that are based on the expertise and the lived experiences of people in the community, and then bring those people together to explore some of the new angles or some other health inequities that they might be interconnected with their already existing priorities and concerns.
Absolutely. All right, thank you all for an amazing session today. I believe our time is officially up. So we're going to go ahead and conclude there. I think Kayla might have had a question for Rory and Jamie in the chat. You can address that separately if you don't mind. But again, thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to all the presenters. These were amazing talks, and I really love the diversity of views and perspectives here. And I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I look forward to touching base with you again soon.
Thank you.